Hey everybody, it's Aaron. I'm really excited for today's video because we're going to be covering a really important topic that's not only my favorite, but impacts everybody. If you have a job, you need to have the ability to talk about your pay with your manager and your HR department such that you're able to manage the conversation and get more. Well, sometimes companies do things preemptively when they're really concerned about keeping their talent. In today's video, I want to talk about what Apple just did, how they started granting one-time special equity awards to some of their top performers in certain departments that really is a signal that they're concerned about the war of talent with certain companies, specifically Facebook or Meta. You know, there's a lot of overlap in the talent of those two companies, the software, the hardware aspects, and as both companies push more into the metaverse, VR, things like that, they're going to be really needing to get the best people, which means they're going to start paying even more. And so in this video, I'll go over an article that I found really quick about all those equity grants that Apple gave. And so how does a company decide to make special one-time equity awards to people? And also, how can you have a conversation so that maybe you can be a part of those special equity awards? And this is an important topic, and I love it so much because I spent the last decade of my career working as a compensation analyst, meaning I worked in an HR department for multiple tech companies to determine what to pay people. So not a function of payroll, but it's an HR role that says, what do we pay people on hire, on annual reviews, bonuses, equity, things like that. So I have a decade of experience. I'd like to share it with you today. So smash that like button because this is a really important video to get out to a lot of people because we all have jobs for the most part and we all have somebody that we need to talk to if we want more money. And these conversations are tough. So I want to start putting out more content like this, and today's video would be around how to manage the conversation around the annual review period when you're supposed to get rated on your performance, which will then result in more compensation for you. Now, let's not have it be a one-sided conversation where they just tell you what you get. You should be able to influence that conversation so it's the best number possible. All right, so smash that like button and let's get started. All right, let's take a look at this article about the Apple special equity grants. Super important because it's going to help you, even if you work at Apple, great, definitely pay attention. If you work in tech, still pay just as much attention because you can have the same type of conversation. So let's dive in. Apple aims to prevent defections to Meta with rare $180,000 bonuses for top talent because tech rivals such as Meta have been luring away employees, and the bonuses come in the form of stock grants that vest over 4 years. So Apple has issued unusual and significant stock bonuses to some engineers in an effort to retain talent looking to stave off defections to rivals such as Meta, which we said. Last week, the company informed some engineers in silicon design, hardware, and select software and operations groups of the out-of-cycle bonuses, which are being issued as restricted stock units, according to people with knowledge. The shares vest over 4 years, providing an incentive to stay at the iPhone maker. The bonuses, which came as a surprise to those who received them, have ranged from $50,000 to as much as $180,000 in some cases. Many of the engineers received amounts of roughly $80,000, $100,000, or $120,000 in shares, said the people, not to be identified because the program isn't public. The perk was presented by managers as a reward for high performers. Now, when we talk about high performers, I'm going to show you something later called the 9-box. This is an internal tool that a lot of HR departments, not internal to one company, it's broadly known, but if you're not in the HR world or in the people management space in corporate America, you probably don't know about it. So this is something that likely was the main driver of how Apple selected who got these equity grants and how much. So stay tuned for that. So representative declined to comment, and this is all because Apple is waging a war with companies in Silicon Valley and beyond, with Meta emerging as a particular threat. Meta has hired about 100 engineers from Apple in the last few months, but it hasn't been a one-way street. Apple has also lured away key Meta employees. The two companies are likely to become fierce rivals in augmented and virtual reality headsets and smartwatches, with both planning major hardware releases over the next 2 years. So that's really important because if you're working there currently or you're in the interview process, understanding the product roadmap and how your skills can help get those things made, marketed, sold is really important to you managing the conversation to augmenting your offer or your annual raise. let's see, the payouts aren't part of normal Apple compensation packages, which include a base salary, stock units, and a cash bonus. Apple sometimes awards additional cash bonuses to employees, but the size of the latest stock grants are atypical and surprisingly timed, the people said. They were given to about 10 to 20% of engineers in applicable divisions. The bonus program has irked some engineers who didn't receive the shares and believe the selection process is arbitrary. The value of some of the bonuses equaled the annual stock grant given to some of the engineering managers. So basically, they get an annual equity grant based on performance, kind of a target every year. And it sounds like these one-time bonuses doubled up on that, based on what this is saying in my interpretation. And going on, it says, and the value stands to increase if Apple's stock price continues to rise. Apple's up 36% this year and hit a market cap of $3 trillion. So the article goes on to say that Meta's trying to poach people for their own things and talks about some other stuff. So now I want to talk more about what a 9-box is and how it probably informed who got these equity grants. So stay tuned for that. So editors, hold for a second. All right, so if you've had an annual review before, maybe you work in a large tech company, large Fortune 500, or even a mid-sized company. Basically, if you don't have, just an owner and no HR person, you likely have some type of performance rating system at your company that you work at. Hopefully you do, right? And hopefully you know what the metrics are that you should be performing against. And in general, if you were to hit them, what would that do to your pay? Now, even large companies don't always have clearly published guidelines about if you hit X, you will be paid Y, unless you're in sales. But outside of that, it is sometimes dubious, which is why these conversations I'm about to teach you are really important. All right, this is so fun. So check this out. Now, a 9-box grid for talent management. This is actually sometimes separately used from the regular performance scale that you're assessed against for your annual goals. So it's like, hey, you're a software engineer, design this, write this code, by this time, the functionality should do this. If you're product management, same deal. You have goals. If you're in finance, accounting, HR, IT, it doesn't matter. Everybody has goals, typically, or should. And, hitting them, get some type of like, hey, you're an okay performer, a medium performer, a high performer. But this is actually separate. This is an exercise that they do to overlay on people's long-term potential. And then it helps with sort of one-off exercises like this, where it's like we're going to give a singular one-off stock grant that is not part of the regular ongoing grants that you get at Merit. Now, the conversation that I want to talk to you about that you should be having with your manager and your HR department, whoever the most influential person is that will be deciding what you get paid, typically it's those two individuals, can work for both. All right, so let's dive in. So the 9-box grid for talent management. This was made by McKinsey to assess market attractiveness for a company to go into. And the HR world kind of adopted it for talent management. So we see on the left axis, we have potential. And on the y-axis, on the x-axis, we have performance, low, moderate, high. And it's called the 9-box because there's, obviously, as you can see, a matrix, a grid of potential outcomes of various combinations of performance and potential. The part that HR departments look at to assess who should get one-off equity awards like this or bonuses is the green. Sometimes they go all the way to the left, that top left of the potential gems, the people who have a ton of potential but just they're not performing great because maybe they're super junior in their career, super early, or maybe newly into a management role, whatever the case may be. But typically it's the green. So they'd say, okay, these people who are in this shaded green have the best potential and or current performance that we really want to make sure we retain. Now remember what the article said. 10 to 20% of the engineering population got these equity grants. So on a bell curve distribution, one could assume that 10 to 20%, no more than that, comprises this green area. Super interesting, right? So this is kind of like an overlay on how people get assessed. Now, obviously, the quantitative and qualitative metrics that go into an assessment like this, that's a lot of different stuff. And that's a deep conversation between HR, the managers, execs, to determine who even fits into this. And then once you're fit into it, then they have to decide what the equity award pool is and slice and dice all those values on, hey, if you're a star, you should obviously get the most, and then kind of a little bit tier down for the high potentials and then the high performers. And by the way, if you ever hear the term hypo from an HR person, they're talking about this high potential, this spot here, the light green in the top. Just a little kind of inside baseball sort of jargon thing to tell you. All right, so now I want to talk about the conversation. And before we dive right into the conversation part that I want to talk about, it's important to know when you have a conversation like this, where in time you are. Specifically, the company that you work at, where is their fiscal year, and more importantly, their performance year from an HR perspective. Yes, annual grants, annual bonuses, annual raises get assessed once a year, typically, sometimes twice. And I have seen it more than that in a few other places, which is crazy. But the point is, you have to know where in time you are with those assessments. And a lot of times, companies' performance years mirror their fiscal years. Pretty safe bet. So for my assessment, we look on Apple's investor relations page, when is their fiscal year? The fiscal year in 2022 runs from September 26, 2021 through end of September in 2022. So what that means is right now we're in the end of 2021, just a few days left, Q4. So that likely means end of September is when things officially close in the financials, and it takes about a month-ish, month and a half to roll up those financials and determine what the number is for the fiscal Q4 and the entire year. Concurrently, HR is planning what their performance rating scale criteria is going to look like. Start talking to managers and training them on like, hey, you're going to assess your employees with these metrics on this type of numerical scale, and then wherever you put people, it's going to spit out these potential numbers. We're still working out the budget, whatever the case may be. And so it looks like now's the time of year. I know the article said it was kind of surprise off-cycle grants, but I bet you it's in tandem with the annual stuff they're already doing. Your regularly scheduled review of your base, bonus, and equity grant opportunities that happens every year. But I think this is considered off-cycle because they're going to give these grants and say, this is just a one-time thing. And it might happen again in 2 or 3 years when the company gets worried about talent, whatever the case may be. So let's get down to brass tacks. How to have this conversation. So knowing where in time you are. It's important to be able to talk to your manager about where you fit into the performance matrix, about what, first of all, understanding the scale, and then what your goals and objectives are and how you're tracking against those. Super key to have that conversation throughout the year. Your manager hopefully is meeting with you in some cadence every 2 weeks, every month, hopefully, right? And if they're not, you should initiate it because you need to have a dialogue, a two-way street. Early in my career, I would get into situations where I wasn't talking with my manager regularly about my performance. We'd talk about, hey, I need you to go do this and that, blah, blah, blah. We'd talk every day regarding that. But we didn't have a lot of one-on-ones about, hey, here's what I like what you're doing, here's where I'd like you to improve X, Y, and Z. And it burned me because we get to annual review time, and it's like we were in radio silence about my performance for 6, 7, 8, 9 months, whatever the last time we spoke about it. And they'd say, okay, here's what I'm concerned about, here's what we're doing, blah, 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 and this is your, mid-tier performance rating. Early in my career, I was a top performer most of the time after that because of this right here. So rather than let all that time go by and then you get the big reveal on the annual performance review, you need to be having a conversation semi-regularly about your performance and understanding the scale and trying to gauge where you fit in the scale. It's tough for a manager to tell you, hey, if it's a 5-point scale, you're definitely a 4. It's tough for them to say that before they actually do the official assessment. But the idea is that, if you show your manager that you're aware of the scale, you're aware of where you are in time, and you need to be aware of your metrics and your performance goals, that, you just don't want to be surprised. You just don't want to get to a point where, they say, well, I wish you would have done this. And you're like, oh, but we spoke about that. Remember, I've documented this conversation. You said to go this direction. You said to ditch that project in favor of this one. And you're like, oh yeah, that's right, I did. Whatever the case may be. But you have to be able to have this conversation, because when it comes to performance, it's getting a little late in the game with the performance review cycle. If you're waiting to have the conversation then, like I said, it's a little late in the game. The window isn't completely closed though. But this is just to take you from the beginning and say, hey, if you know where you are throughout the year, this is great for 2022. If you work at Apple or another tech company, this is great game planning to start laying the foundation of communication, two-way street of communication, so that you can have great momentum coming into your annual review. Because the people who are doing annual reviews right now at Apple, or maybe like it was a couple weeks ago, hopefully they had great communication with their manager in HR about what's expected of them, how they're tracking against those expectations, and then how to remedy it. It's important to have that two-way communication, because if you're able to get in early, say 3-4 months into a performance year, the manager's like, I'm not happy with where you're at. There's still time to get back on track and maybe start exceeding. So you come into the performance discussion on top, rather than you find out that they're not happy right before or during your performance discussion. Then you get that conversation, that opportunity to get an outsized raise or bonus or equity grant. That gets kicked a whole year. So you need to have these conversations now. That's why it's super important. That's just for your general, regular annual stuff, the stuff that just every year you're having a conversation about, that everybody thinks about. This article was about a special one-time equity grant on top of all that regular stuff. And so if you're doing well with the regular stuff, then it puts you into a much better position to be eligible for these special surprise fun equity awards. Retention grants a lot of time is what they call them, because it's more like a preemptive thing. Like, hey, we love you so much, you're doing so well, make it rain on you a little bit. And, hopefully when all those times you've been getting hit up on LinkedIn and recruiters calling you, maybe you just tell them that you're not interested. That's ultimately what this is about from a company perspective. From an employee perspective, then, if you weren't a part of this is something where you really need to make sure that, again, are you having the communication, two-way street, semi-regular with your manager to know what the expectations are, how you're doing against them, what do you need to do to meet and then exceed them. That's like par for the course in corporate America. You should be able to establish and develop those relationships and manage those conversations, because it impacts how much you're paid. If you just go like, hey, they'll recognize me, I'm just going to keep my head down and work, it's noble, and I feel you. I did that when I was younger, but don't do that. You're not going to squeeze that orange as much as you could if you don't initiate the conversation, initiate the two-way street accountability between you and your manager, because then it's completely up to them about like, oh, I'm going to let you know at your performance review that I'm not happy with you, or you're doing great, but are you being a rock star? And you have the potential to be a rock star. So then start talking about how to do that. That's number one. Number two, if you're silent, even if you're doing great or okay, somewhere in between, the company could assume your silence is you feel fine. You're happy. You don't need anything special. But if you want something special, and if you are special, you're kick-ass, top high performer, then sometimes you need to vocalize and market yourself regarding that. All right? So this is my favorite topic. And this is something I actually coach people on. So if you want help, go ahead, email me, Aaron at Respark Coaching. And this is something that I do. It's super fun. But either way, hopefully you got value out of this video. It's really important to be able to have these conversations, because you only get one shot a year usually to have these conversations, and you need to have momentum coming into it so you have the best opportunity to maximize. Now, the last piece I want to give you, let's say you get a raise, your performance and evaluation was good, okay, somewhere in between, definitely not bad. They're going to give you something great, but you wanted more. So what do? Well, first of all, don't reject the raise. In my career, I would see employees, who wanted more say, I reject this raise or this equity grant. And it's just like, wait, what are you doing? Don't do that. Take it, thank you, and may I have more? So take what was given and then have a conversation about what is necessary, what are the possibilities of getting an extra raise on top of what you already received, an augmented equity grant, more of a bonus, whatever the case may be, for that same year, rather than having to wait all the way to the next year. And that's where you talk about the metrics. How was this calculated? How is it figured out? How did you juxtapose that against my performance? How much was the company's performance weighing on it? How much was my individual performance weighing on it? Or the team, whatever the case may be. You need to isolate what factors are in your control so that then you can determine how the narrative around those factors got translated into your manager's head so that they can go, okay, this is the number for you. All right, so there's a lot more that goes into this. There's budgets on the manager's end, all sorts of things. And there are things that sometimes you don't have a lot of control over, but you can still, if you understand them, leverage the things you do have control over even more. So, I love talking about this. Drop a comment about what you think you need help on or what you've seen in your company and how this last, end of year is going. Super exciting times. Smash the like button, consider subscribing, and I really appreciate you watching. All right, I'll catch you next time.